Is belief in God just wish fulfillment? Hello and welcome to our video series on the existence of God, where we explore questions and topics related to God's existence and also analyze arguments for and against the existence of God. Is God real? Or is he simply a comforting idea we invent to cope with fear, suffering, and death? Some of the most influential thinkers of the modern world have said exactly that. They argue that belief in God isn't about truth, it's about psychology. According to them, humans don't discover God, we invent him. But is that really the case? Today we're going to examine this particular claim carefully. We'll look at the arguments of the German philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach and the Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, and then we'll ask a deeper question, one that often gets ignored in our culture today. Does this objection actually disprove Christianity, or does it end up undermining itself? Let's start with the objection itself. Why do people believe in God? People believe in God not because God exists, but because they want him to exist. So they invent God to feel safe, to feel loved, protected, and hopeful. At first glance, this sounds plausible, but plausibility is not the same thing as truth. So let's examine where this idea comes from. The first major figure to popularize this idea was the 19th century German philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach. In his 1841 book, The Essence of Christianity, Feuerbach argued that God is nothing more than a projection of idealized human qualities. Everything we admire, love, justice, wisdom, power, immortality, we take these ideals and project them outward onto an imagined divine being. So when people talk about God, according to Feuerbach, they're really talking about themselves, their hopes, fears, and longings. The Bible says in Genesis 1:27, humans are made in God's image. Feuerbach flipped that around and said, no, God is made in our image. But there are a few problems with this hypothesis. First of all, it is fundamentally unprovable. In his book, God and Other Minds, the American philosopher Alvin Plantinga points out that projection is offered as a speculative explanation rather than an empirically demonstrated cause of religious belief. There is no independent criterion by which one can establish that belief in God arises from projection rather than from a genuine encounter with transcendent reality. This now leads us to even bigger issue. In his book, Reasonable Faith, American philosopher and apologist William Lane Craig argues that even if one could show that belief in God arises from desire, it does not follow that God does not exist. Wanting something to be true does not entail that it is false. Hunger does not imply that food is imaginary, nor does the human longing for meaning imply that meaning is illusory. At most, Feuerbach provides a possible account of why people believe, not a demonstration that belief itself is false. Now, another major figure to popularize the wish fulfillment idea was Sigmund Freud, the Austrian psychoanalyst. Sigmund Freud repackaged Feuerbach's projection theory in psychological language. In his 1927 book, The Future of an Illusion, Freud argued that God is simply a magnified father figure. As children, we depend on our fathers for protection. As adults, we project that need onto the universe and invent God. Religion, according to Freud, is an emotional crutch, an immature response to reality that humanity should eventually outgrow. But once again, this explanation runs into serious problems. First, Freud's theory has no historical evidence. Rodney Stark, the American sociologist of religion, argues that Freud's speculative reconstruction of early human psychology and religious development is not supported by anthropological or historical evidence and is widely regarded as obsolete by contemporary scholars. Second, it is largely untestable, and where it can be tested, it often fails. In his book, Why Would Anyone Believe in God?, the American psychologist Justin Barrett points out that empirical studies in the psychology of religion indicate that believers do not consistently conceive of God as a father figure. Many associate God with maternal qualities, abstract moral ideals, or impersonal transcendence. So Freud's reduction of religious belief to paternal projection thus oversimplifies the complexity of religious experience. And most importantly, Freud himself admitted something crucial. An illusion, he said, is a belief motivated by desire, not necessarily a false belief. So even if Christianity were motivated by wish fulfillment, that would tell us nothing about whether it is true. Now, here's where things get really interesting. If belief in God can be explained as wish fulfillment, then disbelief in God can be explained the same way. Some people don't want God to exist. They don't want ultimate accountability. They don't want judgment. They don't want a universe with moral authority over them. In fact, in his book, The Last Word, the atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel candidly acknowledged this point, admitting that he hoped there was no God because he did not want the universe to be the way that it is. If Freud's logic is applied consistently, atheism itself may be interpreted as a form of wish fulfillment. The objection, therefore, undermines itself by proving too much and ends up undermining itself. Let's now turn our attention to Christianity. Christianity differs in significant ways from purely psychological or mythological belief systems. The Bible consistently appeals to reason, reflection, and evidence. Isaiah 1:18, 2 Timothy 2:7, 1 Corinthians 14:20. Its central claim, the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, is presented not as a timeless myth, but as a historical event claimed to have occurred in specific place and time. As the Apostle Paul himself tells us, if the historical claim is false, then Christian faith totally collapses. 1 Corinthians 15:14. This historical grounding distinguishes Christianity from mere wish fulfillment. The truth of Christianity does not stand or fall on psychological comfort, but on historical and evidential consideration that are in principle publicly accessible. Finally, the wish fulfillment hypothesis struggles to account for the demanding nature of Christian discipleship. Christianity does not promise ease, comfort, or social advantage. On the contrary, it calls for self-denial, moral transformation, and willingness to suffer. Mark 8:34. Historically, Christians have often faced persecution rather than privilege for their beliefs. If Christianity were merely an invention designed to satisfy human desires, it is difficult to explain why it would impose such costly demands on its adherents. The difficulty of the Christian life suggests that it is not tailored to human comfort, but oriented toward what Christians believe to be the objective truth. So in conclusion, is God a figment of our imagination? Well, While some people may invent God to comfort themselves, that does not mean God is imaginary. The wish fulfillment argument fails logically, psychologically, and historically. And it applies just as easily to atheism as it does to Christianity. The real question isn't why people believe. The real question is whether Christianity is true. And that question must be answered, not by psychology alone, but by evidence, history, and reason. Christianity does not rest on what we wish were true, but on what Christians claim actually is. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video useful and helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content such as this. See you in the next episode, and God bless you.